Right. Hi, Caleigh. Nice to meet you. And I hope again I'll see you here at the MedTalk, your first MedTalk with me. It's a pleasure to have you here. For those who listen, I met Caleigh through Keith and Keith Berelowitz, the one I wrote the clinical trial book with. And then we just got more into, I read her story for our book, and then I got really interested in her story, and we got in touch, and there we are right now here at the MedTalk.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I feel really honored to join, and I've watched your Med Talks before, and it's such a great conversational discussion. So I'm excited to have people join in and just have a really open dialogue here.
Yeah, wonderful. I think you fit our topic, our aim very well. Mine. I keep saying our, but it's it's my MedTalk. So would you like to start telling us something about you, just in brief, and then we go into more detail along the way? So where do you come from? Why are you here?
Of course. My name is Caleigh Haber. I am from California, but I currently live in Spain. And I have been a patient for 35 years. I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, a genetic, rare, progressive disease when I was born. And throughout the journey of being a patient, I have had 2 double lung transplants, 3 open heart surgeries, and many, many other things along the way as well. And
hi, Brian. Could you mute yourself? Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. That's my husband there. And
hi, Brian.
So he's joining. But my patient journey has evolved from patient to patient advocate. And I think as a patient, I was very much in survival mode, and I had to learn how to be a patient advocate for myself. And that evolved into being a patient consultant, where I really aim to bring my lived experience into helping build clinical trials and research and connecting patients with that.
That's a wonderful mission, and I think you are the perfect person for that. But let's go a bit back in your timeline. Would you like to tell us how old were you when you got diagnosed?
So I was diagnosed at birth, and that was because when my mom was 8 months pregnant, she was T-boned by a police officer going through a red light. And that went into that's my mom. She can probably add into this. But that led into more research into me. And basically she was getting what do you call the things with the ultrasound? She was getting an ultrasound, and they saw that my stomach was really distended, but they didn't know why. And so they advised my mom to get a specialist in case I needed surgery at birth. And through that surgery, I was diagnosed. I was very lucky. I was born in 1990, and the gene for cystic fibrosis was found in 1989. And so when I had surgery, that doctor had seen this before in a patient and diagnosed me on the spot with cystic fibrosis. And my mom can probably add that she had no idea that they carried the gene. My mom and my dad carried the cystic fibrosis gene. They had no idea what the disease was. And my mom has been the biggest advocate for me, my biggest cheerleader, always telling me I could do anything in life. And through her advocacy, that taught me how to be an advocate for myself and for others.
That is wonderful. Thank you, Mom, for caring for Caleigh.
Let me just clarify a few things.
Yes.
So you had bowel obstruction. They did know that through the ultrasound. So they knew your intestines were blocked, and that's why they wanted the surgeon, ready to go when you were born, because they knew that was a problem. And the tar substance that was creating the blockage is why the surgeon knew it was CF. He says that's always the case.
Very interesting. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
So how did you feel as a mom in that moment? You must have been devastated.
During the ultrasound moment or at birth?
Both.
The ultrasound moment, I would go every week, and it seemed, I didn't know what I was in for. Obviously, we thought we would have the surgery, and that was traumatic enough. And then she'd be better, and we'd go home, and everything would be normal. It wasn't until the surgeon came in after the surgery and said, she still needed to do the sweat test, but 99.9% chance of having CF that. Well, we weren't really devastated because we didn't know what it was. We were like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, my brain was like, how do we fix it? Let's fix it and move on. But obviously, it wasn't a fixable thing.
At least not that fast, right?
Like Caleigh was a fighter from the get-go.
Yeah.
30 days in the ICU and the NICU, and she did great. Got to go home right on schedule.
I bet she's a fighter. I would go and give the mic to Caleigh now, but you can always come back in the picture when you want to clarify things, because you might know the answers to my next question a bit better, because she was very young. Because this is what I would like to know is, how did it go, like the process from being diagnosed, and you now said 30 days ICU, and then she went home. What happened in those 30 days, and how did you grow up, Caleigh? What do you feel like?
Well, my mom can probably speak on the 30 days in the ICU, and I can speak on growing up with cystic fibrosis. Also, my best friend from the age of 5 is in this call, so she can probably also add some things, how it felt to be a best friend to somebody who is diagnosed with a terminal illness. So Mom, what was it like for me in those 30 days of being born in the NICU?
Well, it was tough. It was tough. You had surgery, obviously, and you had to recover from that. I stayed so I could breastfeed and always be there for her, even though she probably didn't even know I was there. But, I needed to be there for myself. And, it was hard. We have 2 older siblings, and, they were normal. So we didn't have any of this situation. So it was my first time spending that much time in a hospital, especially with someone I loved. And it was, I didn't know any better. So I just did what had to get done and slept by her side, and, never left her.
Would you like to tell our listeners what CF actually is, and in what condition Caleigh was in those 30 days? Was she like on a machine getting ventilated, or what?
She wasn't ventilated, and she was breathing fine. It was more of a recovery from the surgery. And, as your viewers might or might not know, nutrition is a factor in CF. Caleigh could eat us out of house and home and never be full and never gain weight. So I was breastfeeding. That's why I wanted to stay, so I could make sure to breastfeed. And even though I was there and doing it, as often as she needed, it wasn't enough. So I realized there and then that I had to supplement with formula, which I never used before. So it was a good learning experience for myself, watching the nurses and what they did and how they proceeded with the enzyme and the medication that needed to be given with every bottle. It was educational, and it was bonding. I would say I have a special bond with my daughter that I don't have with her other siblings. And it's probably from going through everything together, and just has made us stronger.
Yeah, I bet. I have 3 kids too. I can imagine what it must feel like for you. And the little one is always, anyway, like the little one has a special standing in the family.
The baby.
I can imagine.
So honey's a baby as well.
We are working on that too. Brian is holding up his hand. This is you're very conversational. There are not a lot of people here, so you can just talk.
Well, not to be annoying, but Caleigh's blood sugars are going down, and she needs to go address those, so she doesn't have sugar next day. So
I have diabetes as part of cystic fibrosis, and my blood sugar is currently 98 down. and I am in my bedroom, and apparently I've had all the sugar in the bedroom, and so I need to run downstairs and get something, and I will be right back. And so I just wanted to allow the conversation to continue and apologize because usually
No
I have
worries.
something right by me.
No
So
worries,
just 1
Caleigh.
second, I'll be right back.
I have your mom. That's perfect. Take your time. So, Mom, just again, maybe we start at the very basic. What is cystic fibrosis for the ones who don't know, who haven't ever heard that? How would you explain that?
Well, Kayla's probably better at that, but cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease that you're born with. You didn't do anything wrong. The parents didn't do anything wrong. It's just genetic, and I carry the mutation, and so does my husband. And we had a 1 in 4 chance with every baby that we had of the baby having cystic fibrosis. Of course, we did not know this at the time because we didn't know we were carriers. But now, and I think things have advanced, and young people who are looking to have babies can always be genetically tested prior to conceiving and knowing all their limitations or avenues of what they want to do. So things have changed a bit. And having never had history of this in our family, even though we could have. And before they didn't know, right? They just thought, oh, you had a cold, or you had the flu, or you just weren't thriving. They didn't, CF wasn't that recognized in the past. Now it's wonderful, all the advances that have been done.
Yeah. Caleigh, maybe are you feeling better? Or you want to?
Yeah, I just had goo sugar, so hopefully
Right.
it'll push me up as fast as possible.
Well, let me know if I can ask you, or if you want to take a few minutes.
Yeah, no, definitely, I'm ready. Yeah.
Perfect. But please don't.
Well, this could lead into the fact that cystic fibrosis, people think, is maybe just a lung disease, but it actually is I always say it's the disease that keeps on giving, and diabetes is one of the gifts that Caleigh got with it.
Yeah, this is one question I was going to ask. What else is there for you in the basket? There is cystic fibrosis and diabetes.
So I wasn't sure if my mom explained what cystic fibrosis was.
No, I left that for you.
Okay, great.
She said you're better at it.
Cystic fibrosis is an imbalance in the sodium in the body, and that leads to thick, sticky mucus that can clog the airways, but not only the airways, it can also clog the lining of the pancreas, the digestive system, reproductive system, and many other areas of the body. And so basically this thick and sticky mucus that lines the airways leads to scarring in the airways. It can be a very good environment for infections to grow. And so when infections grow, that can cause patients to have a decline in lung function, scar off the lungs, and eventually cause the airways to become thinner. And that can be very restrictive to air passing in the lungs. So that can lead to the need of a double lung transplant, which is what I did in 2015 and 2018 as well. And that's thick.
You were 25 and 28, right? You were born in 90, right?
Yes, that's right. But I also was listed 2 years before the first one and a year before, about 6 months before the second one. So there was a lot of waiting, a lot of living on supplemental oxygen and feeding tube as well. As my mom said, it's been very difficult for me to gain weight historically up until my second double lung transplant. And so the digestive system is also a big one. And in cystic fibrosis, there's over 1,700 different mutations. And these different mutations can also mean different things. It can mean that maybe your digestive system is impacted more by the disease, or it could be more progressive in the lungs, or it can be more progressive throughout the body. So for me, my disease really started to progress in high school. I had a really healthy upbringing. I was involved in sports, and that was something that both my parents really leaned on a lot. It was the importance of exercise, because exercising could clear my airways and cause me to cough up that thick and sticky mucus and prevent infection. And so I was always in every sport possible, and I was always dancing and having lots of fun. And then in high school, the progression started where I needed tune-ups. We call it in cystic fibrosis world. And a tune-up is where you go to the hospital for a week or 2 weeks and you get IV antibiotics to get you back to the baseline of where your lung function should be or has been historically. And that is the goal, to sort of bump you up as much as possible, as soon as possible, so that those infections don't take over and the decline doesn't continue to progress. But unfortunately, in high school, it did.
So that means when, like during your childhood, like early childhood, you didn't have to take any medication at all, or?
Oh no. Oh no.
Yeah,
No.
definitely not. I
Like
still had to take.
Sorry, Kayla, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say I still had to take pancreatic enzymes in order to digest my food. And I still had to do 4 1-hour lung treatments throughout my upbringing. So it was a big part of my life and a big part of my day. But my parents always raised me to be very open about my disease, which has led to advocacy, and very, very much to think like, I am a peer. May not be healthy, but I am still somebody who is equal to my friends and my siblings and has those same expectations in life. And so to really go for my goals as much as possible. But Sahani can probably add to the fact that growing up with cystic fibrosis, how was that for you, Sahani, as a best friend and watching me kind of progress in my disease?
It's a very good point of view here, Sahani. If you would like to talk, I would love to hear what you experienced.
I'm just going to be a cheerleader for Sahani for a moment. Kayla did go to, well, as you said, she needs medication anytime she eats anything. So think about that. You throughout your day, you might grab an apple, you might grab a bag of chips. Every decision she makes to feed herself requires medication. So, she's 5 years old going to kindergarten or 6, whatever. And she went to a school that had a nurse of full-time RNs. That was priority for me. And Sahani was such a great best friend that she would remind Kayla and walk her to the nurse, for every snack, every lunch, everything. But go ahead, Sahani. I just wanted to say how great you are and how much I appreciate you.
Thank you for the introduction.
What do you want to say?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Go
Yes,
ahead,
that's
Sahani.
very sweet. Yeah, no, I would echo what Kayla was saying. I think for a lot of our childhood, it's not that it was not a part of your life or our lives as somebody like, who was one of your best friends. It was definitely kind of constant, and they were always, it was kind of a consideration. You had to make sure we had your medication when we went somewhere, all of those kinds of things. But for the most part, you led a very healthy, normal life. We went to school together until we were 13, and you were popular and outgoing, and we did everything together. It was not a big deal. We used to, like you said, we were pretty active, ride our bikes, go around, do all those kinds of things. And then I do feel like it slowly progressed in high school, but you were still very active, still doing cheerleading, still all of that. And then for me, it was a big change like after high school, because I went to the East Coast for university, and I think that's when your health kind of like really rapidly declined in the, I would say maybe like, what was it, 18 to 21-ish. It changed quite a bit. And so that was really, as somebody who was very close to you, but not physically close, it was quite challenging to kind of navigate that. But of course, you had a great support system with you there, and were a great advocate for yourself. But it's been really great to see how you've also, I think it's been amazing to see how proactive you've become as an advocate in that time and beyond, and really taking that role and the leadership in that position for yourself as you've become an adult and grown up. And yeah, it's been an honor to be a part of the journey.
Thank you.
Love you.
For your opinion. That's very sweet to hear.
Love you too.
Caleigh, now we are in high school, so and your progress went faster. So what can we imagine? How did that look like? What did that look like for you?
So as Lohani said, I was still very active. I think the hardest thing for me was that I was falling behind a lot in academics because I would leave for a week or 2 weeks for IVs and I would come back. Or my brother was a big part of helping me throughout that too. He was a senior when I was a freshman. And so there was times where I would go to the hospital for a couple of days. I would get a PICC line, which is a central line in my arm. I would start IVs and make sure that those IVs were improving whatever infection I had. And then I would be discharged and I would come back to life and school and sports. And I would do IVs for maybe an hour or 3 hours during the school day. My brother and I would go down to the nurse. We would take the medication out of the refrigerator. My brother would actually help set up the central line for me, do the flushing, set me up. I would go back to class. He would go back to class. And then we'd meet again and take off the line and go back to school. And then we would do sports. We'd come home and we would do the same thing all over again. And so my brother was really big in helping throughout that experience and making sure that I didn't feel outcasted because of what I was going through. But even that said, you know, I was falling behind in school. I didn't have much support when it came to academics and like tutoring or from the school itself. And so I hope that has changed. I have heard that it has in some places. I've heard that it hasn't in some places. But, you know, cystic fibrosis wasn't looked at as a special needs situation in school. And so I wasn't given like extra resources for that. And so as I went into my senior year and I started missing more school because I started having complications not only with the lungs, but also with the GI system, I missed more school. And I was actually sometimes pointed out as not knowing things I was supposed to by teachers. And so that was really difficult. Yeah, and I didn't quite know how to advocate for myself in that situation yet because I was still learning how to use my voice in different areas of my life. But I hope if you are in school right now and you're listening, that is definitely not okay. And you should tell somebody, your parents definitely, or your friends, and try to get help. I did have amazing friends that were there to cheer me on and point out that that wasn't okay. But as Sahani mentioned, you know, I was able to graduate and sort of slightly, I had really bad grades, but I was able to graduate senior year. And I wasn't able to go to university, but everybody else around me did go. And so that was very isolating. I also had a family trauma and my parents separated. And so I was going through a lot emotionally. And I think that did contribute to the decline of my disease because as we know, stress in life can lead to infections. It can feed infections. Stress can also feed diabetes, spike blood sugars. So everything in life, mentally, emotionally, physically, it can all tie together and be sort of a feeding ground for infection and decline.
How old were you at that time? For the ones who don't know the American school system.
Yeah. And so living here in Europe, I'm learning it's very different. But I was 18 at that time.
You were 18.
And yeah.
And in a crisis, privately, emotionally, school sucked. You couldn't go to university. So how did it go on from there for you? That is another, not 10 years. Another 10 years to your second transplant and another 7 to your first. That brings a few questions. I have so many questions. First of all, how were the 7 years going until your first lung transplant? And then why did you actually need a second one?
So the first few years out of high school, I was actually surprised that I was discharged from my pediatric hospital and I was in need of finding an adult center. And so that was a difficult journey for me because, like I said, my parents had separated. I was, you know, in the midst of fighting to get insurance from the government. And I was also in different living situations. And so there was a lot of stress personally happening. And that did lead to, a decline in some ways. So I was jumping around hospitals trying to find a doctor that I really liked. I decided that I would go to culinary school because I thought by some will I would be able to survive that. So I went and I was living with roommates and I was going in and out of a hospital at Stanford at that time. And we were looking at Stanford as a secondary hospital, but it actually became the first very quickly because I realized that the knowledge they had about cystic fibrosis and that adult center was so beyond anything I had experienced before. And the way that they looked at me as an adult to advocate for myself was also very different. And so I was pushed into independence of my health very quickly. But as that decline continued, I did need help. And so my mom, of course, I didn't even have to ask. She told me she was moving from Orange County in southern part of California to the northern part of California, where I was at that time, to be with me. And so she dropped everything in her life to do that. And, my mom worked 5 jobs to support us.
Wow.
And we were buying pieces of furniture, one piece at a time. And it was very difficult. And I'm just sharing this very personal piece of life because in health, personal life plays a part too. And there's a lot of patient burden, not only with our health and our responsibilities, but also in life. And so my disease progressed and I was mainly living in the hospital, and I would do about 3 weeks in the hospital, maybe 1 week at home. I would catch an infection, I would go back. And so my very invisible disease became very visible because I was put on a feeding tube and oxygen, and I was becoming very ill.
So, you suffered under different kinds of infections, more and more often and more severe.
Yeah. And as that mucus started to take over, that environment for infection just continued to foster more infections.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And then I'm assuming it went into a state where your only chance was a lung transplant.
Yeah, so I caught an infection and I had my first real job, and I really wanted to pretend I wasn't sick. And so I was trying to stay at work as much as I could, as many of us do. But I woke up and I could not breathe, and I knew I needed help urgently. And so we went to the emergency room that morning, and I didn't leave the hospital for a few months. And that's when I was put on a feeding tube, put on oxygen, told I needed a first double lung transplant, but that I also wasn't a candidate because I was very ill and I wasn't being a compliant patient at that time.
Oh, right.
And so I was listed as non-compliant, and it took 2 years to prove compliance and be listed for a first double lung transplant.
Why did they put you, like, why were you not compliant? What lead them to saying that?
Mom, would you want to add to this? You're muted. For everybody who joined, this is my mom, Lizette, my husband, Brian, and my best friend from childhood, Sahani.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Compliance. So the word leads you to believe that Caleigh was defiant, but it really wasn't that. It was more that she was a young adult wanting to live a normal life, and her disease required, like she had said from the beginning, 4 hours of airway clearance. As her GI issues progressed, and she was always having to do something. But sometimes she, may not have felt like it. She wanted to go with her friends to a movie or whatever it might have been. So I think as she grew and matured, she realized, and as the disease took over, she realized, what, the most important thing in my life has to be my health, because without it, I'm not going to be here to be able to go see a movie or do whatever with my friends. So she herself worked very hard those 2 years to get herself where she needed to be in order to qualify for the transplant list. And it took some time, but she did it, and she's still doing it now, which is great.
Yeah, I think for the compliance issue too, the doctors formed a list that showed all the things that I needed to prove to them to be a compliant patient. That was very helpful, because for them to line it out, my mom actually asked, can you tell us why? Can you show us why? What do we have to do?
Yeah.
And so for them to list out, you need to lower your A1C. You need to show up to clinic once a week and tell us everything that's going on. And we need to do a pulmonary function test. We need to do labs. We need to do these things, evaluate what's happening right now, and how can we sort of try to fight it so that we can get to a stage where I am healthy enough to go through the procedure. Because while you do have to be very ill to get an organ transplant, you also have to be strong enough that you can survive not only the operation, but the recovery afterwards. And so there's a lot that goes into being a organ recipient. And it took 2 years. Like we said, we reached all of those goals. We had to prove that we could stay and stabilize those goals for a period of time. And then I was listed for a first double lung transplant.
And this is where I'm gonna, sorry,
go.
I was just gonna input that everyone listening, please become an organ donor. There just isn't enough, and there's a lot of people waitlisted who require it, and you're not going to use it, so please share.
Yeah, and as a HCP here, I can let you know many people are afraid that they won't get helped when they have a donation, how you say, license with them, but that's not true. You will always get the best care possible. Thank you for that, Lizzie. In those 2 years, were you then only living in the hospital on antibiotics because you were so extremely ill? How can I imagine that?
I wouldn't say I was only living there, because I would be hospitalized for, I would say 2 weeks minimum, but more likely 5-6 weeks. And then I would go home, and then I would only be home for a few days, catch something else, or decline a little bit more and go back to the hospital. So it wasn't full-time living in the hospital, but it was living in the hospital more than living outside the hospital, and, losing a lot of relationships and friendships, and also gaining a lot of relationships and friendships with the nurses and the hospitals there and the doctors there.
Yeah, it sounds like you got a really good care team there, right? I wonder, clinical trials, was that before or after your transplant?
So actually, there was medication that was in clinical trials while I was listed for my first double lung transplant. When I was listed for a double lung transplant, I had a lung capacity of about 12%. So it was very, very low. It was very hard for me to walk around. I had little muscle, little weight, and I was just very ill. And this clinical trial was successful, and it was, successful in that first phase. And they were going into a phase of having patients take the medication. They did approach me and offer to have me participate in that trial, and I really wanted to. And it was very much this thing of hope for a potential of helping me gain some lung function. But what the medication was doing and the lung function that it was giving for people was a small percentage to what I needed to actually get off the list and be healthier. So it was a really hard choice, but I decided not to participate in that clinical trial just due to the fact that it wouldn't take me off the list. It would just keep me on the list longer.
Yeah.
So I decided not to do it. And that was one clinical trial. And I just want to, say, and Jamie's son, he's the father of a son on a clinical trial that's here in this room. And clinical trials are very different for everybody. It's a different experience. It's very unique to the person and what they're going through. And clinical trials can mean that maybe you just give a sample at a lab, which is what I've done many times over, but I'm not actually required to come for special visits. I'm not talking to a special team. I'm just simply giving a sample. That can be a very easy way to participate in clinical trials in science. But there can be very intense protocols for participating, which can include traveling. It can include staying away from home for long periods of time. And Jamie, maybe you can add a little bit of your experience with your son in this.
Hi, Jamie.
Hi guys.
Nice to meet you, Rita. Again.
Yeah, I mean, for us, our experience of clinical trials is, you know, a little bit different. And as Caleigh mentioned, it's different per individual, per disease, and per sort of intensity of, you know, the treatment of the trial. So yeah, we are away, you know, very regular. In the last 6 months, I think we calculated we've been away from home 42 times, which is multiple blood draws, overnight stays, infusions. But yeah, it's a different experience.
Yeah, I know your journey too, Jamie, and I really have so much respect for you. Caleigh, if you don't know, we had a MedTalk together as well.
I watched it. It was great.
Yeah. So as you said, it can be very different for people, and then also depending on the condition, right? How intensive that is, and if you have an interventional or an observational study, it's quite a big difference. Now you had your first lung transplant finally. Why did you need another one? This must have been really traumatic, like a really big surgery and a lot of recovering. And I'm guessing you didn't recover as well to get a second one.
So I did have a lot of obstacles in the beginning, but I did reach a point where I was gaining lung function and gaining a bit of independence. I had, of course, come off supplemental oxygen. I was using my feeding tube still every day, but I wasn't using it 24/7. And so there was a lot of things to celebrate. And I did have a medical trauma in 2016, just about 7-8 months after my first transplant. I was traveling with my family to Hawaii, and this was a celebratory thing. It was a huge thing for my mom, my brother, and myself to go. And we were just living life. I mean, it was the first time we could swim in the ocean and hike. And when I say those things, I was still using, a raft to swim around. I hadn't swam in a long time. I didn't have the muscles, but we were doing it, and that's what mattered. And we were happy. And I had a intestinal obstruction because I was so dehydrated, and it led to constipation, which led to a small intestine bowel obstruction. And so I aspirated, and that led to respiratory infection and stomach infections. And I was emergency intubated, and we flew back to California. I was in a coma for a month, and I had to relearn the basics of life at that time, to walk, to talk, to hold my head up, everything. It was really hard. And the damage that was done on my lungs was irreparable. And so the lung function that I had gained at that time, which was from 12% to about 70%, went back down to 30-20. So it was hard, and it was devastating. And that didn't mean I needed a second double lung transplant, but it meant that I wasn't going to regain that lung function again, which was very, very hard realization to have after so much fighting. But at that time, I was still doing everything I could. I was taking immunosuppressants, and those anti-rejection medications are something that we regulate all the time. We measure the levels and make sure that the levels are appropriate to prevent rejection of the organ transplant. And so the levels that I was having were extremely low. And that's due to cystic fibrosis, not having the proper absorption of food and also medications.
Right.
So we were trying to change those pills. We were doing orals. We were doing sublingual. We were changing doses. I was hospitalized just to make sure that I was actually taking the dosage because the doctors wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
And my body wasn't absorbing it. And that's what eventually led to organ rejection.
Oh no. All right, that sounds like a hell of a journey, really. It's wow, you must be such a fighter to go through all of this. So it sounds like you were really ill. Again, how did you make it to get the new lung transplant kind of fast after this? Like it was only 2 or 3 years in between, right?
Yeah. So a month after this medical trauma I mentioned in 2016, I met my husband and we quickly fell in love. And for him, it was love at first sight. For me, it was very soon after. And we were planning a life together. And I actually moved out of the house and moved in with him. And it was extremely fun, happy time in my life. But I went into organ rejection and I was fighting to get a second double lung transplant at the hospital where I was. However, as we were doing everything we could to kind of set me up for success in a second double lung transplant, I was just declining rapidly. And I was going from needing 1 liter of oxygen to 3 liters of oxygen to 5 liters of oxygen. And it was scary. And it was the first time in my life where I was afraid to go to sleep at night because I thought I wouldn't wake up. I would tell my husband, can you just watch me? I don't want to go to sleep. I don't want to fall asleep. It was hard. And, the dynamic in my life was changing from relying on my mom and my brother for everything physically and emotionally to relying on somebody totally new in my life. I mean, not new, but semi-new in my life, and trusting, and committing to that and believing that I could be vulnerable. And I'm happy and I'm very blessed that he allowed me to do that. But as that decline happened, my doctors started to tell me, it's getting pretty bad. You're getting very sick and we don't think we can do a second double lung transplant now. It was shocking. I mean, I thought I was being worked up to be listed. And then suddenly I was told I wasn't going to be able to have a second double lung transplant. And so my mom and my brother were fighting to keep me at that hospital. And my husband and I started to look everywhere around the country that we could to take me. The problem was that I was so ill, I really couldn't get into a plane to fly anywhere.
Yeah.
So I was going to have to be intubated to go somewhere. And if I was intubated, I wasn't going to be able to get off the vent. And so I was looking for hospitals that would transplant me on a vent. And luckily, when I was in the ICU, I got accepted into a hospital in Southern California. And my husband turned in his marbles, as he likes to say, for us to try to get seen there. And I took a medical evacuation plane to Southern California from Northern California and lived in the hospital for 6 months while I waited for a second double lung transplant.
Wow, Kayla, I think healthy people can't imagine what you went through and how resilient you must have been at that time, really. I really get goosebumps just thinking about it. And I'm so happy you met your husband. And in this time,
All right, I'm going to be a cheerleader for Brian now because Brian is a gift from God, really.
Oh,
He loves my daughter like no one else, and he is smart and devoted and loyal and all good things. So thank you, Brian, for continuing that journey. And Kayla kind of glassed over a lot of stuff. It was a very difficult time for her. She left to go to her Stanford appointment with my son and her husband, and just for a routine kind of appointment. And can you imagine, you leave your house, right? We were just talking about this the other day. You leave your house, your hairbrush, wherever, whatever, and then you just never come back ever. She went from that hospital appointment to flying down to LA.
that was all
Well,
all in one. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And her
Crazy.
husband, well, once we knew we were going to LA, he came back, packed up their whole apartment, put it in the car, and drove straight down to LA while I was on the plane with Kayla, medevacing her down. He was just, I can't say enough.
Wow.
And then we get to UCLA where we're thinking, okay, we're gonna, check in and they're gonna tell her what she needs to do and all this. We'll find a place to live and then she'll wait, like we thought we did the first time. You wait at home when you can. But it was just like, nope. But what was so cool was we flew in and landed on the roof and the nurses come up to, bring you down. And so and one of the nurses knew Kayla, she knew all about her through her social media. So immediately it felt like family.
Wow.
And then we're there and they're like, well, Kayla, you're never leaving here till you have your new set of lungs. So that was kind of shocking, okay. So this is it. And again, with everyone's help, we decorated her hospital room to make it as cozy and comfortable and home-like as needed. And her, Brian, and my son lived there for, what was it, 6-8 months?
Yeah, 6 months
Before-
while we waited.
Before she got the call.
And my brother was my full-time caregiver at the hospital while Brian was working to support all of us. And then at night, Brian would come and spend a couple hours with me. He would come on the weekends and give my brother a break. And we just worked as one little unit for that time.
Wow, guys, I can't imagine how strong your relationship must be. And also your brother, is he, did he become a doctor or a nurse, or is he seems to be very talented.
He's a little tech boy now.
Is he?
And yeah. And we'll see where we go as far as tech and health and innovation together. But
Well,
yeah, I think, he went through a lot of trauma and he's happy to separate a little bit from it
yeah.
and get a breather. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, let's fast forward. You had your second lung transplant that worked well, as we see. You are here. You're working finally. Really? Tell us about what after the second transplant. I could also talk to you for another 3 hours, but maybe we set up another MedTalk. You are now working as a patient advocate. And you're working with pharma industry, and tell us about it. How can we imagine your life now as a more or less healthy Caleigh?
Yeah, so I went from being a patient in survival mode to being a patient advocate because I was forced into patient advocacy for my own life while I was, sick and almost dying. And I realized that there was a lot of gaps in the system for patients and a lot of knowledge out there that is at our fingertips, but we just don't know where to find it. And so I wanted to turn this advocacy into not only advocating for myself and the community that I have, but doing it in a way that brings impact to a larger community. And so naturally, I sort of went into clinical trials and research and medicine because it was something that, I have this lived experience, and lived experience can be expertise, and I can use it in a way where I can bridge that lived experience with the industry and help them understand the patient perspective so that patients aren't only thought about and included at the end, but we are included from the beginning in what is being built in the industry.
Right. And how do you feel does that work? Do you feel it's bumpy road, or do you feel like they are open-armed and welcome you?
I think that there are so many welcoming open arms, and I've been really lucky to have that. And people are super receptive, to giving me knowledge and having conversations with me, which is what I need to learn, because the transition from patient to patient advocate to patient professional and consultant, it's one that I'm still learning to navigate every single day. There's people that I'm working with that have been in the industry for decades, and it can be intimidating. But what I have to remember is I've also have this lived experience for decades, and I can use that to empower other patients to use their voice as well and amplify their story. So that is really what I hope to do.
Yeah, from what I see on LinkedIn, you're doing a great job also to, it becomes more and more professional, it looks more and more professional, and sharing your very private thoughts and experiences is something that opens a lot of doors in minds of people. I think that's more valuable than just pure data, numbers and statistics, but actually talking to patients who are experiencing different kinds of things is so much more valuable than that. So I think what you're doing is amazing, and I wish you the best of luck for that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a journey, and I feel really lucky to be here. And I hope that I can continue to use the lived experience to help shape research and medicine, because I think clinical research is extremely crucial in order to move the needle forward in medications and treatments for people to improve quality of life and hopefully eventually cures.
Yeah, well, I hope it will help. And there's a lot of trials out there, and I'm very positive when it comes to the outcomes of different trials and different diseases. One last question: Fight to Breathe. Tell us about that. What is it?
Yeah, Fight to Breathe started because I needed my first double lung transplant. And during that time, I also needed to fundraise in order to live close to the hospital and have 2 full-time caregivers. As you can tell, we didn't quite have that freedom to be able to go into that without fundraising. And so I started Fight to Breathe because I really needed it out of necessity. And I began sharing my story online just to get the word out about this fundraiser. But what I realized was that writing was my way of processing what I was going through. And so I kept writing online, and that grew into a community of now over 200,000 people across different social media platforms. And we're a really strong community. But to me, Fight to Breathe and Fighting to Breathe is just about that support for one another, because it is so crucial as patients that we have other peers in our disease and other diseases that we can talk to, be completely vulnerable with, share our stories, listen to their stories, and just, try to share the knowledge that we have. Because I think that one of the ways I've learned the most is through listening to my peers talk about what they've been through.
Yeah, well, and then also the feeling to not be alone in this. I can imagine that gives is a big value of your community. So where can we find you?
Yes, you can find me on Instagram at fight2breathe, www.fight2breathe.org. You can also listen to my podcast, Our Fight to Breathe, which amplifies stories in the community. And it also talks to clinicians and experts in the field as well. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Caleigh Haber, and that's spelled CaleigHaber.
Wonderful. You know what? You send me the links, and I will link them underneath this post of this MedTalk on YouTube and also on my website, because I think your mission needs to be shared, and we need more like that. We need more people who stand up and use their experience and just be proud of what they have achieved. And also, as you said, you are a master in your advocacy. You are someone who has just as much background and experience, and is so worthy on sitting on the same table as the others, professors and doctors.
And not just me, but I think a lot of people who have gone through this lived experience have the ability to raise their voice. And I hope that they feel empowered by listening to this to do so.
Well, I hope so too, and I'm very positive about it. I would love to thank you for today, and I'm sure we're gonna have another MedTalk because there is a lot of questions open still. Thank you also, Mom and Sahani and Brian for being here and supporting, and for supporting Caleigh all the time through.
Thank you.
I'm amazed. Thank you guys. You are such nice.
Thank you everyone for coming.